What if I told you that your name has already traveled farther than you realize? Not because you chased attention, begged for recognition, or tried to impress anyone, but because something about your presence, your resilience, and the way you move through life became impossible to ignore. There are rooms you may never enter, conversations you may never hear, and people you may never meet who already know your name. You thought you were being overlooked. Meanwhile, your story was becoming a subject of discussion. So listen carefully, because the moment you understand why your name reached those exclusive rooms, you may never see yourself the same way again. You don't always need to announce who you are. Sometimes your results introduce you before you ever get the opportunity. You can spend hours explaining your vision, defending your choices, telling people what you're capable of, and trying to convince them that you're different. But eventually, words become noise if there is no evidence behind them. Results are different. Results have weight. Results walk into the room before you do. Think about how many people have underestimated you simply because they couldn't see the full picture. They saw where you were, but they didn't understand where you were going. They judged your present circumstances without knowing the amount of discipline being developed behind the scenes. They saw the quiet season and assumed nothing was happening. They saw you struggling and assumed you were losing. They saw you moving slowly and assumed you had stopped. But they didn't understand that growth isn't always visible while it's happening. A seed doesn't look impressive when it's underground. Nobody applauds it. Nobody sees the roots forming. Nobody knows how much pressure is being handled beneath the surface. Then one day, something breaks through the ground, and suddenly everyone notices what was developing all along. That's what your life can become. Your quiet work matters. The mornings when you pushed yourself to continue matter. The nights when you refused to give up matter. The moments when you chose discipline over comfort matter. The times when you kept learning after failure matter. You may think nobody noticed, but your transformation is creating a reputation you don't have to manufacture. People notice consistency. They notice the person who keeps showing up. They notice someone who doesn't collapse every time life becomes difficult. They notice someone who gets rejected and continues improving. They notice someone who doesn't need constant applause to stay committed. That kind of person becomes memorable, and sometimes your name reaches places you never expected, simply because somebody saw what you were doing and realized there was something different about you. You may not know who is watching. You may not know who is talking about your work. You may not know who has mentioned your name in a conversation you weren't invited to. But that shouldn't change how you operate, because your goal was never supposed to be getting everybody's attention. Your goal was supposed to be becoming undeniable. There is tremendous freedom in understanding this. You don't have to chase every person who doubts you. You don't have to respond to every critic. You don't have to prove your worth to people who have already decided not to see it. Keep building, keep improving, keep becoming. Let your results carry the conversation. When you become genuinely skilled, disciplined, reliable, courageous, and focused, people eventually have to adjust their opinion of you. They may not admit it immediately, but results make denial increasingly difficult. That's why you should stop worrying about whether people recognize you today. Recognition is often a delayed reaction to preparation. Your responsibility is to prepare before recognition arrives. Develop yourself before opportunity appears. Strengthen your mind before pressure increases. Build your character before success tests it. Because one day, the same people who barely noticed you may suddenly wonder how you became so different. And the answer will be simple. You were working when they weren't looking. You were growing when they weren't paying attention. You were preparing while they were making assumptions. You didn't need to announce your transformation. Your results announced it for you. So keep going. Don't interrupt your progress just because nobody is applauding yet. Don't abandon your vision because the room is quiet. Don't confuse silence with failure. Sometimes silence simply means the evidence isn't finished yet. Finish the work. Become the proof. And when your name eventually reaches rooms you never knew existed, you won't need to explain why you belong there. Your results will already have introduced you. Some doors closing in your life were not proof that you were unworthy. They were redirections. And I know that is difficult to believe when you're standing in front of a door you desperately wanted to open. When you've invested your time, your energy, your hope, and your emotions into an opportunity, rejection can feel deeply personal. You start asking yourself, what was wrong with you? Wasn't I good enough? Wasn't I talented enough? Didn't I deserve this? Why did they choose somebody else? But sometimes the answer isn't that you weren't enough. Sometimes the answer is that the destination was too small for the person you were becoming. There are doors you begged to enter that would have kept you trapped in an environment you were supposed to outgrow. There are people you wanted to stay connected to who would have limited your vision. There are opportunities you thought were perfect that would have consumed your energy without giving you the growth you actually needed. You couldn't see it at the time because disappointment has a way of narrowing your vision. When something doesn't work out, you focus on what you lost. You don't immediately see what you're being protected from. But time has a way of revealing what emotions hide. Think about the things you once cried over that you can now barely remember. Think about the situations you thought would destroy your future that eventually became the beginning of something better. Think about the people you thought you couldn't live without, only to discover that life became more peaceful after they left. That is the strange mathematics of growth. Sometimes losing something creates space for something greater. And this is where you have to become dangerous in your mindset. Not dangerous to other people, but dangerous to your own limitations. You have to stop allowing rejection to convince you that you're finished. A closed door is an event. It is not your identity. Someone can reject your application without rejecting your potential. Someone can overlook your talent without eliminating your talent. Someone can misunderstand your vision without making your vision meaningless. Never give another person the authority to define your future simply because they failed to recognize your value. You don't need every opportunity. You need the right opportunity. You don't need everyone to believe in you. You need enough belief in yourself to keep moving until the evidence catches up. And sometimes, the rejection that hurts the most becomes the rejection you eventually thank life for giving you. Because it forces you to become stronger. It forces you to become more independent. It forces you to develop skills you might never have developed if everything had gone according to plan. Comfort can make you complacent. Rejection can make you relentless. When nobody gives you the opportunity, you may create one. When nobody opens the door, you may build your own. When nobody recognizes your potential, you may become so committed to your development that recognition becomes irrelevant. That is the mindset you need. Don't waste your life standing outside a closed door, begging someone to reconsider. Turn around. Look at the road behind you. Look at the possibilities ahead. There may be another door waiting for you, one that requires a stronger version of yourself. So take the rejection, take the disappointment, take the unanswered message, the missed opportunity, the failed attempt, the unexpected goodbye. Take all of it and turn it into fuel. Because your story isn't ending at the door that closed. Your story is continuing beyond it. And one day you may look back and realize that the rejection you thought was proof that you weren't chosen was actually the moment life redirected you toward the room where your name was always supposed to be heard. People are fascinated by transformation. They may forget what you said, they may forget the promises you made, and they may even forget the goals you once talked about, but they rarely forget someone who completely changed their life. Your story becomes powerful when people can look at where you started and compare it with where you are now. You don't need a perfect history to have an extraordinary future. In fact, some of the most powerful stories begin with struggle, confusion, rejection, loneliness, failure, or uncertainty. The difficult chapters don't automatically make your story weak. Sometimes they are the chapters that give your story meaning. Think about everything you have already survived. There were moments when you didn't know how things would work out. There were nights when you questioned your direction. There were situations that made you wonder whether you had the strength to continue. Yet somehow you continued. Maybe you didn't feel courageous. Maybe you were terrified. Maybe you were exhausted, but you kept moving. That matters. There is something powerful about a person who continues moving forward without having every answer. You don't need to know exactly how everything will happen. Sometimes courage simply means taking the next step while uncertainty is still standing beside you. Your experiences have been teaching you. Every disappointment taught you something about people. Every failure taught you something about yourself. Every setback forced you to develop patience. Every rejection forced you to become more independent. Every difficult season showed you what you were capable of carrying. You may have thought those moments were simply obstacles, but they were also training, and training changes people. This is why you should never be ashamed of the chapters you had to struggle through. Don't hide the fact that you had difficult seasons. Don't allow your past mistakes to convince you that your future is already written. Your past is information. It is not a prison. You can learn from it without living inside it. The person you were 5 years ago doesn't have to control the person you become 5 years from now. You are allowed to evolve. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to develop new standards. You are allowed to become more disciplined, more confident, more focused, and more intentional. And when that transformation becomes visible, people begin asking questions. How did you change? What happened to you? Where did that confidence come from? How did you become so calm under pressure? They see the result, but they don't always see the years behind it. They don't see the private battles. They don't see the mornings when you had to motivate yourself. They don't see the moments when quitting would have been easier. They don't see how many times you had to rebuild your confidence after something knocked it down. But you know what it cost you to become this version of yourself. And that knowledge gives you something nobody can take away: self-respect. You don't need everyone to understand your journey. Some people only see the finished product. They don't need to understand every chapter. Let them see the transformation. Let your life become the evidence. Your story doesn't have to be perfect to inspire somebody. It only has to be honest. The person who is struggling today may need to see that someone can struggle and still rise. The person who feels rejected may need to see that rejection isn't the end. The person who feels forgotten may need to understand that being overlooked today doesn't mean being irrelevant forever. Your journey can become proof. Proof that people can rebuild. Proof that setbacks don't have to become permanent. Proof that a difficult beginning doesn't determine the ending. So stop wishing you had a different story. Build a better next chapter. You cannot rewrite yesterday, but you can make tomorrow so powerful that yesterday no longer has the authority to define you. One day, people may hear your story and wonder how you survived everything you survived, and you will realize that every chapter, the good, the bad, the painful, and the uncertain, was preparing you for the moment your story finally became bigger than your circumstances. The moment you stop chasing recognition, something inside you changes. You stop performing for people and start building for yourself. You stop asking, do they see me? And start asking, am I becoming the person I know I can be? That shift is powerful because chasing recognition gives other people control over your emotions. If they applaud, you feel successful. If they ignore you, you feel defeated. If they criticize you, you question yourself. But when your purpose becomes stronger than your need for approval, their opinions lose their power. You begin to understand that not everyone needs to understand your vision. Some people will only believe in what they can immediately see. They will look at your current circumstances and decide what they think you're capable of. They won't understand the hours you're putting in behind the scenes. They won't understand the discipline you're developing. They won't understand why you're willing to sacrifice comfort today for a better tomorrow. And that's okay. You don't need everybody to understand. You need to understand yourself. You need to know why you're doing what you're doing. You need to know what you're building. You need to know what kind of person you are trying to become. Once you have that clarity, outside noise becomes easier to ignore. There is incredible power in becoming comfortable with being underestimated. Let them think you're ordinary. Let them think you're moving too slowly. Let them think you don't have what it takes. You don't have to interrupt their assumptions. You don't have to announce every goal. You don't have to post every victory. You don't have to explain every move. Sometimes the strongest response is simply continuing. Keep working, keep learning, keep improving, keep becoming. There is a difference between seeking attention and creating impact. Attention asks, who is watching me? Impact asks, what am I building that will matter even when nobody is watching? Choose impact. Because the people who become truly unforgettable are rarely the ones who spent their entire lives trying to be noticed. They became unforgettable because they developed something valuable within themselves. They became skilled, they became disciplined, they became dependable, they became courageous, they became mentally strong, and eventually people couldn't ignore the evidence. That is the kind of recognition you should pursue. Not empty applause, but respect earned through substance. You don't need to convince people that you're powerful. Become powerful in your habits. You don't need to convince people that you're intelligent. Keep learning. You don't need to convince people that you're capable. Keep producing results. Let your life make the argument for you. The less you need to prove, the more energy you have to build. And that's where your transformation accelerates. You start protecting your time. You become selective about who gets access to your attention. You stop wasting hours arguing with people who aren't contributing to your future. You realize that every minute spent trying to convince someone of your worth is a minute you could have spent developing that worth even further. Your focus becomes your advantage. While others are watching what everyone else is doing, you're working on yourself. While others are seeking approval, you're building competence. While others are announcing their plans, you're creating results. And eventually something interesting happens. The people who once ignored you begin noticing you. The people who doubted you begin asking questions. The people who dismissed you begin wondering what changed. But by then, you won't need their approval anymore, because you will have discovered something much more valuable. You were never supposed to spend your life begging people to recognize you. You were supposed to become so committed to your purpose that recognition became a side effect. So stop chasing the room. Stop chasing the applause. Or stop chasing the validation. Build yourself, build your character, build your skills, build your discipline, build your future, and let the right people discover you naturally. Because when your name eventually reaches exclusive rooms, you won't have to force your way inside. Your preparation, your character, and your results will have already opened the door. Maybe the biggest mistake you're making right now is believing that your current circumstances represent your final level. They don't. Your current situation is a snapshot, not a prophecy. Where you are today does not have the authority to decide where you will be tomorrow. You may be struggling financially, starting from zero, rebuilding your confidence, learning new skills, or standing in a season where absolutely nothing seems to be moving. But movement is not always visible. Sometimes the greatest changes are happening beneath the surface long before the world sees the result. You have to stop measuring your potential by your present position. The room you're standing in today may be temporary. The people around you today may not be the people who surround you tomorrow. The opportunities available to you today may not compare with the opportunities waiting for you later. Your current audience is not your final audience, and your current circumstances are not your final destination. But there's something you must understand. A bigger room requires a bigger version of you. You cannot simply wish for greater opportunities while remaining committed to the same habits that created your current circumstances. If you want a different level of life, you have to prepare for it. You have to become capable of carrying what you're asking for. If you want greater responsibility, develop discipline. If you want greater influence, develop character. If you want greater opportunities, develop skills. If you want greater success, develop consistency. If you want to walk into rooms filled with powerful people, become someone who has something valuable to contribute when you get there. This is where preparation becomes more important than recognition. You might not be famous today. Nobody may know your name. Your work might still have a tiny audience. Your achievements might still seem invisible. But that doesn't mean you should stop preparing. The opportunity you want may arrive suddenly. The person who can change your trajectory may discover you unexpectedly. The door you've been waiting for may open when you least expect it, and when that moment arrives, you don't want to start preparing. You want to already be prepared. Imagine someone finally gives you the opportunity you've been asking for. but you're not ready to handle it. Imagine the door opens, but you lack the skills. Imagine the platform appears, but your discipline cannot sustain it. Imagine recognition arrives, but your character isn't strong enough to carry the pressure. That's why this season matters. This quiet season is not necessarily punishment. It can be preparation. Use it. Read more, learn more, practice more, think deeper, become stronger, develop patience, build discipline, improve your communication, strengthen your confidence, work on the parts of yourself nobody sees. Because one day, the things you're practicing privately may become the very reason someone chooses you publicly. And remember this, you don't need to know exactly who is watching. You don't need to know who is talking about you. You don't need to know whose attention you've captured. You simply need to make sure that if your name ever enters a room you never expected to reach, the person they describe is someone you are proud to become. Let them say you're disciplined. Let them say you're reliable. Let them say you're intelligent. Let them say you're resilient. Let them say you're different. Let them say you don't quit. But don't chase those words. Earn them. Build a reputation that doesn't depend on advertising yourself. Your future may be larger than your imagination, but you have a responsibility to meet it halfway. So don't shrink because your beginning looks small. Don't quit because the room is quiet. Don't assume you're forgotten because nobody is applauding. Keep preparing, keep becoming, keep moving because there are doors you haven't seen yet, opportunities you haven't imagined yet, and rooms you haven't entered yet. Your name may not be known everywhere today. That's okay. You are still becoming the person whose name belongs in those rooms. And when that day comes, you will realize something profound. The waiting wasn't wasted. The quiet wasn't meaningless. The preparation wasn't invisible. It was all building you for the moment when opportunity finally knocked. And this time, you were ready to answer.